Hello, and welcome to Darkly Lit. Please take a seat. We have a pot roast cooking in the oven if you're hungry. Oh, the blood on the floor? Don't worry about that. It's nothing. I am one of your hosts for this evening, Kayla King. I'm joined by my other two co-hosts. We have Sade.
Sorry, I'm like, can I act like a sullen teenager? But I'm like, fuck, I don't know how to act. I'm just gonna sit here and slouch in my chair.
And we have David.
Hey, can someone get me a flashlight? I think there's something down here in the crawl space with me. Kayla, I think I found your pot.
It doesn't mean a cooking pot.
Cooking pot. No, it's not actual.
Yeah, but it's the pot where you keep your pot. I think something ate it.
We just finished reading the script Feathers and Teeth by Charise Castro Smith, which is, you know what, David, why don't you give the summary?
Okay, well, first, it's very important to couch this in the fact that this script was written by the same person who wrote Encanto. So, one of the writers of Encanto.
She's not only the writer in Encanto, she also, to help give some context too, she also wrote for the Haunting of Hill House series.
Fair. Well, here's one thing. Family tragedies are spread throughout all three of these stories.
Yeah, she knows her family tragedies.
Yes, weird family dynamics. This is our first play script that we've read here on Darkly Lit. And it was an interesting one. It's set in 1978, somewhere in the Midwest, in a mill town. We have a cast of 4 characters. There's Carol, who is the newest addition to the family. She is a nurse who was taking care of the late mother of the household while she was suffering from cancer. There is her boyfriend / partner, Arthur.
Yeah.
Who is the widower, recently widowed just 2 months ago. There's 13-year-old Chris, who wants nothing to do with either of them and is dealing with a lot of grief and suspicion about Carol. And there's an 11-year-old German boy named Hugo who lives just across the street. The whole thing is set primarily, all the acts are set in one scene, which is the kitchen of the household. And things take a turn pretty quick when Arthur runs over a creature as he's coming into the driveway. He thinks he might have killed it. We never actually get to see the creature because it immediately gets thrown into the burned pot for a pot roast. And it's something with feathers and teeth, so they have a hard time identifying what it is. Chris, taking the initiative and hearing the sounds of it whining and moaning in the thing, stabs it to death with a knife. Immediately, the fucked up dynamics of this whole family kind of kick in because it's only the barest minimum of a family, but everybody's trying to pretend that everything's going to be okay. I think Chris might be the most realistic, but she's also got it. I think the best way to summarize this, honestly, is just to point out that pretty much everybody is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much everybody is terrible, and they're all putting on airs to a degree. Chris thinks Carol might have been responsible for the death of her mother. Carol doesn't understand why Chris doesn't want to be friends, but clearly she doesn't actually care about Chris. She just wants to be with Arthur. Arthur's fed up that the 2 most important women in his life now won't get together, but it's possible he might have also been implicit in the death of his wife. And then Hugo's just crushing on Chris and is kind of strung along by her, as what happens is later on the pot mysteriously reappears in the kitchen after being buried in the yard with the body of the animal in it. And now there's baby versions of it in the pot, having eaten the body of their mother. So there's some metaphor shit going on here. And while things continue to escalate over the course of the story, eventually everybody is either consumed by the creatures or murdered until only Carol is left. And the play ends on a very bleak note. It's funny, it's tragic, it's got a lot of blood and gore and sci-fi elements, and I think we'll get more into the details of it as we go, but that's my brief summary of Feathers and Teeth.
So what did we all think about this? I guess what is our general opinions?
I thought it was a fun read. Initially, okay, I don't remember why we chose reading this. I forgot it was connected to Encanto. I don't know. It very quickly was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be kind of interesting, kind of fun, and yeah, it didn't disappoint. I wouldn't say I loved the end, but overall, it was a fun ride. Definitely a quick and easy read too.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about the ending because I wanted things to go one way and then they completely went another, and I'm like, that's actually kind of surprising that it leaves me going, oh no, that's how I felt.
Yeah, I think For the most part, this is definitely a fun ride. I would love to see this performed.
Yeah, I would love to see it. The directions are very good. I love the way that the voice of the action goes, honestly.
One of the things I always get weary about when someone writes horror for theater is like, oh, they're gonna turn it down a notch because it's theater. But no, she has no issue being like, nope, there's blood, there's murder, people are getting eaten, there's torture.
Finding a really clever way to make it so you could do this without much of like not make it a huge production and hide the creatures. You never see the creatures; they're only ever described.
A lot of it seems to be sound based as well with the creatures, because there's a point where I believe you're supposed to hear the creatures around the auditorium.
Yeah, like scurrying through the walls and stuff.
Which I could only imagine how uncomfortable.
Yeah. Very Gremlins-esque almost.
The thing is, though, there's some loose ends or like things that I'm like, why does that not get addressed? But maybe there is something I missed. Like, okay, you have Chris, and there's a point where Chris uncomfortably sits on her dad's lap.
Yeah. I thought at that moment she was like being possessed by her dead mother. I thought that was maybe where we were going to go with that, but then it's completely unaddressed. No, I had that issue too.
I wonder if the intention was to leave you with a lot of these open-ended questions, though, because like nothing is ever truly set in stone in terms of like the explanations for things. We only get ideas and implications because everything's coated in this veil of like lies and only what you can kind of see on the surface. I mean, I think the most insight we get is really honestly Chris, because she gets those creepy nightmarish window visions that pop up in the background for her.
I also feel like that it was kind of left a little like open, not really open-ended, but like unfinished, because she was like, oh, I think I'm communicating with my mother. And then we do get that instance where like there's like shadow mom in the window when like Chris is being killed, suffocated. You know, I thought maybe the mother saves her or something, but in the end, it didn't actually add anything.
No, it didn't. I don't know why it's in there. I guess it's to create discomfort. That's the only thing I can think of. Because that's the only part that I am a bit more like, why was that added? I mean, for the most part, you do kind of realize that Carol is not a very nice person at all. And it could be possible she is a demon. I mean, if we have these horrifying creatures with feathers and teeth existing that eat people, why couldn't she possibly be a demon?
Wasn't the implication that she was pregnant with them?
Oh, no, because she said she was pregnant. She's like, I'm pregnant when she got into a fight with Chris.
Right. But then at the end, it was like she rubs her belly and we hear the creatures. I thought that was like because the sound is emitting from her belly.
I kind of got that impression, but I almost got it was more like a metaphor, like the creatures eating everything alive is almost like the way Carol is, and that she's going to give birth to more monsters, essentially. Like metaphorically speaking, I don't know.
Well, because there was also that part where her eyes go black.
Yeah, that's true.
So I thought she was like the mother of these creatures.
It could be. I mean, they're at least in a weird metaphysical sense. Like, I mean, the things were born in her mother's antique pot, which now we can't even be sure is truly hers either, because she lied about her upbringing to Chris.
I mean, when she first says, I'm pregnant, there's always that part of my brain that's like, you're lying, bitch. So it's hard to know what's real or what's not. But then she does rub her belly. Like, I'm reading stage directions right now because I have the script up. And it says, Carol takes a moment to survey the wreckage in the kitchen. She rubs her belly, and all of a sudden we can hear strange chirping of the newborn animals in the pot.
Like, it's like it's flashing back to the newborn animals since they're not in the pot anymore?
Maybe. But then Carol very deliberately turns off the light in the kitchen. She exits. Maybe that's to like signal more the fact that these animals are now going to eat.
They're going to eat Chris.
They're going to eat Chris's body, basically.
Yeah.
She's kind of getting away scot-free with this because the creatures basically eat everything, and now she gets away with murdering Chris. But also, what does this mean for... I just realized this kind of turns into, is this going to be apocalyptic? Because the creatures are able to eat people.
I mean,
they're growing.
I was thinking it could be that way. You never know. It's left kind of ambiguous. Because, like, are we seeing the beginning of something that might be the beginning of the end? If you take this play in a literal sense, what does it mean? So, for the world at large, now that these things are multiplying, apparently. It's never specified how many of the creatures there are and where they came from.
No, we don't. It just kind of appears and he accidentally hits it with his car. I also do appreciate that it opens up like in the first act, or no, it'd be the first scene.
Yeah.
We see Chris's dad, Arthur, covered in blood. You're like, oh shit, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I know it's because of the animal, but
It's foreshadowing.
yeah.
It is foreshadowing. This is a very smart play in that, because it's trying to do a lot with a little, you know?
I found that interesting that there's a lot of music in there, a lot of rock music. Do you think it's just similarly with Guardians of the Galaxy, it's a way to show Chris's connection with her mother Ellie? Or do you think there's anything more to the songs? Or
I mean, the song choices feel deliberate for sure. And they do reinforce that connection, but I also think it's a sign of the times to continue to couch us in the time period.
oh, make it really feel like 1978?
Yeah. Plus, they come back in that scene where she's like Chris is almost like ritual dancing as she's getting ready to like put an end to Carol, you know?
During the whole scene where Carol's tied up and Chris is dancing with a gas mask on and wearing Carol's nursing uniform, she's listening to Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd.
Yeah, this whole family definitely had issues.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think it's important to stress here. No one in this story is remotely a good person. They all have big issues in their own way. The only one I was remotely sympathetic to was Chris.
Yeah.
So that's why I was so mad that Carol ended up killing her at the end. And that Carol got away, because Carol was the worst, in my opinion.
But it is a horror, so
Yeah.
Hugo, technically
Hugo is the only innocent one.
Yeah, he's not like a little kid on Chris, but that's about it.
and then I even forgot his name. Like, I had to look it up really quick. I could remember Carol, Arthur, and Chris. Hugo's not in it as much.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Hugo Schmidt?
Yes, Hugo Schmidt. There's also clearly a theme about motherhood in this. I'm not sure what the play is trying to say about it, though. But it seems like Carol is absolutely manipulative.
Oh, for sure.
Because she'll say things and Arthur is like, really? I guess you're right.
They do that to each other a lot, actually. And Carol is clearly pulling strings here.
Well, it's definitely set up like I think even in like kind of like the character notes of like they just kind of want to present that like, oh, everything's fine, everything's dandy, you know, everything will work out in the end kind of image of what like a perfect family should be.
Yeah.
So I think when one of them is like, yeah, it'll be fine, and like they feed each other in that sense.
There's an interesting note where it says the characters are just slightly larger than life. All of them, with the exception of Chris, probably wish that they were characters on the Brady Bunch. There might even be laugh tracks.
Oh my god. I would love to see the stage of the laugh track. Could you imagine if there's like canned studio audience applause as the play ends? Do you imagine?
Oh god.
And then maybe the sound of that getting drowned out by the skittering and snarling and chirping of the creatures.
And the munching.
Oh. I did like this overall. It literally felt like kind of a more of an emotional gut punch for me because like clearly the shadow woman who's out the window is trying to tell Chris not to fall for it. But she does, and then Carol basically chokes / snaps Chris's neck with her legs. And I'm like, oh fuck.
With her thighs.
Yeah.
I'm like, Chris, oh my god.
I don't know. I didn't like that, but not because like I became like attached to Chris as a character, but almost it didn't feel satisfying for me at the ending. Overall, there's like definitely
if Chris died, that's fine. I just wanted Carol to lose too.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know why it bothers me? It's because throughout the whole thing, Chris has been totally against Carol this whole time. And then this is the one moment that Chris decides, you know what, I'm just going to listen to her, which is weird. Like, she's been so against her.
Well, they do also share that cigarette briefly before that.
That is true. There is that moment. And then Carol actually lets her guard down, but actually shows her some appears to show her some remorse.
Yeah.
For that.
But it's hard to say when anybody here, any of these people are being genuine, you know?
It's also interesting to reading this as a play because usually with reading a book, you kind of create the own visuals in your head and decide how you kind of almost decide how you want to present it, what characters you want to cast and all that. With this, it feels like you kind of have to think about it and be like, okay, well, how would this look? I don't know. With a book, it feels more just like it naturally happens. Your just brain naturally comes up. with this, it's like, okay, based on the parameters of what I've seen, how would this look on a stage?
You know what's funny?
Mm-hmm.
Remember when a couple years ago when you and I went to see that production of Night of the Living Dead as a stage play?
Oh, yeah.
You could set it in that kind of space, and that's kind of what I was picturing as is a very low budget, very simple set design, but with the characters being really selling the performance, you know?
Mm-hmm. I could see that.
Yeah.
But one thing is to add that crawl space. No, I mean, the crawl space isn't hard to make. You just make the stage higher.
Yeah, you have an understage
Yeah.
or something in front of the stage that can represent the crawl space. That could be something.
It's weird because it does kind of force you to think like a stage director. Like, okay, I would put this there. Now the window.
Reading the stage directions was really cool. I actually liked that aspect. I had a lot of fun with this, honestly, because it was such a nice change of pace from what we are normally reading. To have those specific visuals, it's like you said, got you thinking about how would I stage this? What does it look like in my head? So now you're suddenly being cast as the set designer and the director.
And I don't say this as a bad thing at all.
I'm agreeing with you.
I mean, it's just a different experience, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it. That's one of the things I like about reading plays at like this.
Now, why do you think this was set during 1978 of all times?
That might just be a time period that the writer was just, feels especially comfortable writing in, or they were, wanted specifically for those song choices, so it just made sense to have it so that they could have those song choices. I don't think that's like one that we could really like pull an answer based on like what we were able to read. Oh, because it feels like it didn't have to be set in 78.
Yeah, it's so kind of hyper reality in some places or stylized that it could be from any era. I was going to say, I think that is probably the case. It's just the era maybe the author wanted to write in. I could also make the ludonarrative choice here that maybe they chose it because it's this is kind of when the veneer of the 50s and the 60s is kind of wearing off, and so you still got people who are like the adults that are still kind of like, I mean, look at Carol. She's trying to put on this image of like, I mean, they talk about having the Farrah Fawcett hair, putting on airs of almost like the housewife, you know?
True.
And same with Arthur trying to be like the breadwinner. The only person who's like got the almost like pseudo counterculture thing going on is Chris, and clearly Ellie was also kind of a counterculture thing. They met in the 60s, in the early 60s, and we know that Arthur was a veteran. He went to San Francisco, and that's where they met. Did you notice too? That says a lot about Arthur. He moved way too fast with that. He moved fast with that relationship with Ellie too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So things keeping long term is not as important to him. Hence why he immediately dove into this relationship with Carol. It is implied that he might have been the one to kill his own wife because as a mercy killing.
Yeah, I think he he does kind of confess it, doesn't he?
He does,
Yeah, he's like, and I am convinced that like he suffocated his wife with a pillow, because we have his introduction is him walking in red-handed.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I didn't think about that. Holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I did appreciate that little detail there.
There's also, I should point out, what do you all think of like the little unexplainable things? Not just like Chris's nightmare images out the window, but like the fact finds an egg in the bottom of her milk glass, and when she opens it, her mother's pearl necklace is inside. Like there's weird little things like that too.
Yeah, that's never explained either, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that's some of the details that I feel like, okay, where was that going? And with like Chris being, killed at the end, I feel like we didn't get that, was left unfinished. So I don't hate those little details. I just don't necessarily want them explained, but I want to know why they like needed to be there. Because from finishing it where it's at now, I'm like, I don't get why that needed to happen. Aside from like why did she have to find it in an egg? Why couldn't she like have maybe just found it in Carol's stuff, and then sees her father give her another one regardless of her getting it back? Like yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that might be to add to the sense of something mysterious going on. I mean, the creatures in themselves are one thing, but now there's also Chris, and there's also the weird thing about Carol's eyes and the implication that she might, at least to Chris, think she might be a demon or a monster of some kind.
I don't know. I guess because like I'm all for like, yeah, give me all the weird shit that's going on, but they just felt everything going on with Chris and like her mother's like spirit, and then the creatures and Carol being weird felt disconnected. I never saw like where that connected aside from like she hates Carol.
You know what? The cool thing about this being a play, though, if you were a stage director, you can actually add things or change things to make these kind of details fit in a way. Like, for example, you mentioned like, oh, maybe the mother is possessing her. A stage correction or some trick of the light can show Ellie kind of possessing Chris at times.
You can lean in as much or as little, depending if you're the director. You could lean as much or as little into that as you want. You could play with it. I think that's part of it too. You know, having been in a stage play, I know that sometimes what the director or even what the actors contribute will sometimes bring deviations to what's written on the page. You know, it's all about interpretation.
Which is kind of cool. To go with your whole theory of maybe Ellie does possess her, there is a point when she's, you know, playing the music and Carol's all tied up and all that. It seems like Chris is in a trance.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, that could be Ellie possessing her. Because that is the one thing that connected Ellie and Chris is the music.
Yeah. And all the times that like certain things come up, generally speaking, when there's the connection, Ellie, it's like the way Ellie kind of reaches back either in Chris's mind or is literally some sort of spectral force or phantom or whatever reaching back to Chris is usually when the music's happening. There's even a part where she lights that candle and she's almost trying to reach out to her mother.
Although the egg thing is kind of weird. I think it's supposed to symbolize, go with the whole mother thing. Because the theme of mother and child really does resonate throughout this play.
It does.
So we have some questions. First, we have a question from Bringer. Thank you, Bringer. Do you think Carol killed Chris's mom?
Yes.
I mean, no, indirectly she did.
I think she probably put the idea of a mercy killing into Arthur.
Yes.
Yes.
And Arthur, probably having seen shit and maybe even done shit in Vietnam, was like, it's a mercy killing. That totally makes sense. And so I think Arthur physically did it. Carol planted the seed.
Carol was the mastermind. And Arthur was just the instrument.
Yeah.
What are the creatures?
They are grief incarnate. No, I'm sorry.
I mean, they could be a result
They
of...
could be, yeah. Yeah, just grief freaking devours you if you let it.
Yeah. They devoured the body of their own parent after it died, and then that was the first meat that they ate, and then they just kept consuming and consuming and consuming baselessly. Because
there is that whole thing where when a loved one dies, especially a parent, I mean, it's never going to go away. That feeling of sadness will never go away. But you do learn to accept it and continue. Although it was only 2 months.
Yeah.
So
it's still raw. It's still real.
Yeah, it made sense for Chris for it to still be very, especially painful for her to see her father move on so soon. That made sense. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That actually makes sense. Because I was trying to think of like there's themes of like grief and then also make sure it doesn't consume you. But in this case, I think maybe it is just grief can consume you, unfortunately.
Well, if we want to cite another story, the long-term effects of grief on a family with Encanto. If you want to hear more of us like waxing philosophical on that, you can listen to our Anna Musings episode about it on the Benview Network.
Hey, I was on that one.
Yeah, exactly. We did. This is the perfect thing to have the three of us do, since we were looking at that one that time, and now here we are and we're dealing with another situation involving grief and family trauma and relationships breaking down. At least in Encanto, things get resolved.
That's also a Disney movie.
Yeah, it has to be in that case, but you can kind of see where the connective tissue is in a weird way.
I mean, you can also see it with Haunting of Hill House too.
You can absolutely see it with Haunting of Hill House.
I mean the series.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm going to force you to watch it at some point.
Okay.
Because it's really good.
Sure.
It is really good.
Jump scares. I hate them. I hate the jump scares.
There's not that many, and they're all justified.
Fair.
Is Ellie the Shadow Woman at the end? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't see why it wouldn't be her.
No, I can't either. Who else would it be?
Yeah, it really only shows up in relation to Chris, so it's gotta be Ellie, in my opinion.
Did anyone read this play a bit like a sitcom, like Too Many Cooks?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely kind of the vibe because they're playing it bigger than life. They're kind of trying to subvert the idea of like the happy family you get in a sitcom.
Was Brady Bunch a sitcom?
I'd say it was, yeah.
Yeah, it's a sitcom because it's a situational comedy. So.
Yeah, it does. Every episode was some new weird nonsense. Whether it's was it Jan getting hit by a football, or was that Marsha?
Wasn't that in the Brady Bunch movie?
It was in there too because it was such an important event.
Okay. I think it was Marsha because it broke her nose.
Yeah.
I didn't really watch the Brady Bunch that much. It was always just something that kind of came on occasionally on like Nick at Night.
Yeah.
But there was one that stuck out to me which showed how clearly in its time it was. Because this was set in the 60s. And there's a point where someone interviewed Marsha about the feminine rights movement and all that. And she's like, yeah, I think I support it. And then later on, it's like, oh no, my family's going to see that. And I'm like, oh my God. Wow. And then we actually got some comments and a couple questions from Dan. Thank you, Dan.
Dan.
So I'm not sure I totally grasp everything that was happening. Neither did we.
Yeah.
I should give it another read. I liked how bonkers it was, and I'd love to see it pulled off by a small-scale theater. I took this to be a tale of a malevolent or vengeful spirit jumping around between bodies from time to time based on the strange and erratic behavior of everyone involved. Arthur was wishy-washy, but some of his behavior seems at odds with himself. Carol eating raw ground beef. Oh yeah, I forgot that.
Yeah, she pops a bit in her mouth at one point. I forgot about that when she's making the hamburger helper.
And also Chris snuggling up to Arthur in what seemed like a non-daughterly way in the beginning made me feel like everyone was being affected by whatever was in the home.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure Carol was the fucking monster.
Yeah. A twofold.
A twofold.
During the war in my country, there were twofold that disguised themselves in human forms. They snatched people from their homes in the night and burned them. Their hearts were ice and their eyes were black pitch pots. And no one believed they were real until much too late. The twofold stole her husband and two of her sons. Also, another weird thing that I realized Hugo does is that when Chris is bitten by one of the creatures, he starts sucking on the wound.
Like he's trying to suck the poison out of her hand.
Yeah,
Poison out of her hand.
To stop the bleeding. It's written as Boy Scout snake bite style, but he is 11.
Yeah.
That's the thing. He's 11.
I think it really is just like him being like, oh, I think this is what you're supposed to do. And it just kind of comes off as off-putting because he's kind of meant to be like a weird dork.
He's a weird dork, and he's important to the plot, but he's not in the thick of it like these three people are, So
yeah.
He's kind of a victim, honestly.
Yeah.
So many people, especially Chris, manipulate him.
Yeah.
So
I think you might be right that it's not just mother and child theme. I think grief really is affecting them, or rather, this person's death is affecting them in a strange way.
Yeah.
Because you know how there's that phrase, grief makes people do crazy things.
They're all basically acting crazy, but trying to hide it. At least Carol and Edgar are. They're just trying to sweep it aside, push it aside, but they can't.
He asks the questions. Do you think there was one entity at play or more? I mean, besides the creatures?
There's the creatures, there's Ellie, and then possibly the twofold.
Yeah.
We're going to use the twofold even if it's not necessary. It's just what Hugo guesses it might be. Maybe a combination of... Maybe it doesn't feel like it's not just circumstance that all these three things are coming together,
It's weird. This is the second time I've read this play, and even so, I keep going back and feel like I'm missing details because there's so much that happens. Was it the spirit of Ellie or something that was there before she died? I think it's Ellie.
It's Ellie.
It's Ellie. I think it's Ellie.
What elements of Carol's backstory were true, and what was the real story with the pot?
Pot's a metaphor.
Because the pot plays a big role in this whole play.
It sure does. Burned cooking pot.
Because at first she said it was her mother's pot, but I think she meant to do that to manipulate Arthur.
Yeah.
And then later on she says, I never knew my parents. And she's like, what about the pot, though? What?
And then she changes her story yet again.
Every part of her story is only used in order to manipulate.
Pretty much by the end, I can't trust anything Carol says.
No.
She doesn't even seem that broken up about what happened to Arthur.
Yeah, no, it was like very kind of like, oh, he's dead. Yeah, no, I don't trust Carol.
Yeah. No one should. They wind up dead. She's a terrible nurse.
Would Chris get her gas mask at the end? Maybe Hugo's place, I guess. I think it's her dad's gas mask.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, okay, he fought in Vietnam.
That's true. Mustard gas and Agent Orange were a thing. Man. The idea that he would have kept that too.
There are people that have kept a lot of items from like their past for even if it's kind of dark.
That's fair.
I have some World War II memorabilia stuff, like a little canteen.
Mm-hmm.
I have an ammunitions box. I have an old first aid kit.
Ooh.
I also have my mind's going blank. The knife that goes at the end of your rifle.
A bayonet.
There you go.
That's honestly kind of neat.
So remember when 1980 Mount St. Helens erupted?
Yeah.
My mom did not live far from there, and she actually kept the ash that was on her car. Yeah, and I actually got to see that when she brought it out of her hope chest.
Ash from the depths of Mount St. Helens.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's all the questions Dan has. Do we have any final thoughts?
Now I want to see this play.
To anyone listening to this, or is a like director or something of that nature, please perform this. I want to see this so badly.
I think it would be fun to see, especially if like they could take some of those elements that are like we're kind of nitpicking at and like flesh them out a little bit more. But yeah, I would pay to see this.
Absolutely.
I think the tricky part with plays too is because it is meant for the stage, it's kind of natural to give enough direction to give an idea of what the play is supposed to say, but then give that creativity to the director and as well as the rest of the cast and crew to be able to determine what they want to do with that. I've attempted to write plays. I mean, technically writing for Midnight Marinara, it's basically a play.
You and I have written several plays just for audio, for radio.
Mm-hmm. And with those, I've had to like say, offer a little changes here and there and say, it could be this gender, or this is what the sound should be like. Also, because I knew it was going to be for audio, I had to make sure it worked for audio, so I had to focus on the sound and everything. With this is clearly a lot of stage direction, a lot of where to place things. Again, there is some weird details that I'm not sure why they're there.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be to allow creativity for the director, and it could just be there for weirdness' sake.
True. I don't know if I have much more to say about it either. I enjoyed the experience. I liked that it did engage us in a lot of discussion about the what, the ifs, ands, the whys, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it definitely gave for some good speculation on like, different themes, why different things happened. We were able to give some critique. I think overall, good read and good discussion, I would say.
Definitely.
So this is usually at the point where we would say what the next book is. However, we have decided we're going to do something different. A lot of Creative Horror has been talking, and we've been wanting to do more projects, and it's been tricky trying to make the time for that, especially since we have other lives, we have jobs and such, to make way for other projects, but also make this feel like an actual podcast. We are going to make Darkly Lit seasonal. From here on out, Darkly Lit will be going from July until December. Instead of letting you know what the book is at the end of every episode, we will let you know what all 6 books will be in advance.
Yeah, we kind of talked about it ahead of time, and we decided this is the route we want to take the podcast. And I think it's going to be really rejuvenating in that respect because we will know well in advance, we're going to talk about it. I think each of us is going to bring 2 books to the table. Mm-hmm. 2 things that we're excited and we want to share with not only each other, but with you, our listeners, to discuss. So we will have that ready for you before we kick things off. Now, the important thing is we're not doing this. We're not going to wait a whole bunch of time before we kick off this new format. We're only going to be taking technically June off before we begin season 2 of Darkly Lit. We're not really going to really label these, let's be honest, but this is how we're going to do it in chunks. In June, we will let you know the books we're going to be reading so you can know well in advance.
This will also allow us to actually give more time to read. And also we might even find books that are longer as well. Because I feel like there's times we feel pressured to choose shorter works in order to make sure everyone has enough time to read the books by the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
Or within a month period.
Mm-hmm.
At least with this, if we know ahead of time this, we could start reading the books early if we want to. So on June 13th, keep an eye out. We will announce the list of the 6 books and which months we will be discussing them in, as well as keep an eye out for projects. I mean, if you like what you hear, listen to our other fine podcasts, such as the Jameson Tapes and Undercooked Analysis.
I don't want to say too much about certain things, but this is going to be an interesting year for Midnight Marinara. This episode coming out in October will mark the 10th anniversary of the podcast. And there's going to be some big changes on the horizon with Midnight Marinara. I don't want to talk about it too much right now. Keep an eye on the Patreon feed, because for some reason, these strange little audio snippets have been popping up there. And they're being released for free, so you can hear them. Do they foreshadow something? Are they just me doing stuff for fun? I promise you they have something to do with the 10th anniversary, but I don't want to say too much. Just, well, feel free to give them a listen. They're kind of an interesting curiosity.
You can listen to these podcasts on the Creative Horror Network at creativehorror.com, as well as on YouTube.
This and Undercooked Analysis and Midnight Marinara are now all listed if you do YouTube music as podcasts.
Jameson Tapes as well.
Jameson Tapes as well. Those are all listed as podcasts now. So if you want to go through the archives of that and keep tabs on it that way, you can do it that way as well. We want to give you more options.
Thanks again for listening. And...
Whoa, what? Hey, oh, shoot. Okay, hold on. I gotta get a flashlight. I think something's back in the crawl space. I'll be right back, guys. Wait, it's not coming from the crawl space, is it?
David?
What? Oh, no. Oh, ah!
Good evening, intrepid listeners. This is the Pasta Shade, the host of Midnight Marinara, and this podcast is part of CreativeHorror.com, a network of podcasts and creators working together to build a constructive community of horror fans. For more content like this, visit us at CreativeHorror.com.